This is a production of Cornell University.
Welcome to you all to the inaugural session of the Lund Critical Debate Series. My name is Nick Vanderwall. I'm director of the Einaudi Center, which is sponsoring tonight's discussion. The Lund Critical Debate Series is a part of the Einaudi Center's foreign policy initiative, which emerged from the understanding that Cornell needs to contribute to important debates in the new post-Cold War period. Since this initiative was launched in late 2006, the center has formed a network of a number of faculty. We've supported enhancements of the curriculum, and we've provided support to faculty and graduate students in a number of activities relating broadly to foreign policy and international affairs. The Lund Critical Debate Series will be a key component of the foreign policy initiative. It builds on the success of our Distinguished Speaker Series in bringing to campus speakers of prominence in international affairs, and follows our sort of sense that it's good to not only engage in these issues, but also engage in them from different perspectives and bring different perspectives to bear on the issues of very broad concern in the world today. Today we inaugurate the Lund Critical Debate Series with a timely and important debate on the options in Iraq for President-elect Obama. When we were preparing the poster, and we were a little late, and we wanted to defer the printing up of the poster as late as possible, because we hoped that we could say something more precise than, Iraq, options for the next president. We were hoping we could say options for President-elect Obama or President-elect McCain. But we thought it would be presumptuous and probably expensive maybe to have two sets of posters done up at the last minute. The Einaudi Center is deeply grateful to Juhi Lund-Biggs for her generosity and foresight in creating and supporting this series, which we strongly believe will strengthen academic discourse and enhance the student experience at Cornell. Judith Lund-Biggs is a 1957 Cornell graduate who majored in American Studies and government in her time at Cornell. She earned a master's degree in foreign affairs from the University of Virginia in 1966 and has maintained a lifelong interest in foreign affairs. Juhi serves on the board of the Foreign Policy Association, a nonprofit organization also dedicated to increasing public awareness of matters relating to foreign policy. Let me say, Juhi has long been a friend of the Einaudi Centers, and I've enjoyed welcoming her back during my tenure as a director of the Einaudi Center and in her sort of semestrial visits to campus. We first discussed the possibility of a debate series a number of years ago, and again and again, Juhi has shown that she's deeply committed to the undergraduate experience at Cornell. We're very, very grateful for this gift and want to thank Juhi publicly. So Juhi, could you... Okay, I'm not an important person in today's debate, so let me just now pass the floor to Professor Fred Logevall, who is going to moderate tonight's debate. Professor Logevall is a professor in the history department, where he's also the director of graduate studies. He's written extensively on U.S. foreign policy and diplomatic history. He's the co-author of the book A People and a Nation, A History of the United States, and co-editor of the Encyclopedia of American Foreign Policy. He's a specialist on the Vietnam War, and on which he's written 2 books and numerous articles, and he has a PhD from Yale University. He will moderate tonight's debate. Please join me in welcoming Fred Logevall.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you and to get a chance to participate in my small way this afternoon. A special delight, I should say, I take as a native Swede in being part of something called the Lund Critical Debate Series, a Swedish name if ever there was one. We are talking about Iraq, and in fact, there's a question mark, as you know from the program, out of Iraq, perspectives for the new U.S. president. And we have a terrific panel assembled this afternoon to help guide us through the difficult issues that now confront President-elect Obama. Iraq has been at the forefront, as you all know, of American foreign policy for 6 years, because it was about 6 years ago that the pace of the debate within the United States quickened about what should happen in Iraq. You will remember the congressional debate, I think very well, many of you, all of you. It was also the time when the debate, I think, sped up in terms of the international community and at the United Nations, something we may have reason to talk about today. The invasion then followed in March of 2003, and Barack Obama opposed the invasion. He campaigned in this election on the need for an American withdrawal from Iraq, quite unambiguously, on the need, as he has said, to withdraw from a war that has now claimed some 4,200, the lives of some 4,200 U.S. troops, has injured perhaps 35,000 American troops, some of them very seriously. The casualty figures for Iraqis, both combatant and non-combatant, is a figure of dispute, but certainly is much, much higher. Conservative figures, I suppose, come in perhaps around 85,000 or so, and less conservative estimates go up into perhaps close to 500,000 troops, a million lives lost. And just today, we were reminded that conflict is still going on in Iraq, with a bombing in northern Baghdad that has claimed, it looks like, about 30 lives. I think it's fair to say that Obama's stance helped him in the campaign. It probably helped him in particular in his primary campaign, his tough and drawn-out campaign against Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton being a supporter of the war not only at its outset, but for some time after the invasion. But the question for us today, and what our panelists, I think, will be discussing and debating, is what not candidate Obama will do in Iraq, but what President Obama will do. He has said that he wants all American combat troops out by May or June of 2010. On logistical grounds alone, I suppose there's reason to question whether that kind of a timetable is possible to get troops and equipment out of Iraq in 16, 17 months. But he has also been clever in leaving himself some wiggle room. He has said that he would be a stupid commander-in-chief if he did not take new facts into account. He has made a distinction between combat troops and perhaps other troops. He's talked about keeping a residual force in Iraq. So there is much that we need to discuss this afternoon, and we have, as I said, a terrific cast to help us do so. I'm going to introduce them now. Just a few words regarding ground rules. Each of our four speakers will deliver about 10 or 12 minutes of prepared remarks. We will then have some discussion following on the panel, and we will then thirdly turn to all of you. So I would encourage you to take mental or written notes because we will have an opportunity for Q&A before we finish. I would ask if you would kindly turn off cell phones for the duration of the event. That would be enormously helpful to all of us, and allow us better, I think, to get into the issues that we want to talk about. I'll introduce everybody at the top, and then we will begin. Our first speaker will be Ambassador Lakhdar Brahimi, who is the Cornell A.D. White Professor at Large and is former UN Undersecretary General and Special Advisor. He served, among other things, as former Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Afghanistan and as head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2004. Previously, From 1997 to 99, he was the Secretary General's Special Envoy for Afghanistan and has served in many other capacities in his career at the United Nations. Prior to coming to the UN, Ambassador Brahimi was foreign minister for Algeria and was the author of the Brahimi Report, a landmark document that recommended major changes in the way that UN peacekeeping and associated post-conflict peacekeeping is planned and executed. As it happens, Ambassador Brahimi, in this very room, if I'm not mistaken, about 2 years ago, gave a lecture entitled Iraq, the Present Crisis and the Implications for Stability in the Middle East. We shall find out whether he wants to revisit some of the issues that he talked about 2 years ago. Our second speaker is Juan Cole, who is Richard P. Mitchell Collegiate Professor of History at the University of Michigan. He has written extensively on Egypt, Iran, Iraq, and South Asia, and has given a great number of media and press interviews on the war on terrorism since 9/11. Many of you, I think, are aware of his blog, which is called Informed Comment, and which has become must-reading for a great many people who are concerned with this part of the world. Among his most recent publications is Engaging the Muslim World, which is so recent that it hasn't actually appeared. It will be out in March of 2009. He's also recently authored Napoleon's Egypt Invading the Middle East, which appeared in 2007, has been a frequent guest on various television programs and, of course, on radio and other media as well. He will go second. Our third speaker will be Judge Raid Juhi Hamadi Al-Saiedi, who is a former chief investigative judge of the Iraqi High Tribunal and is the Cornell Law School's first Clark Middle East Fellow. He served as the chief investigative judge of the Iraqi High Tribunal, which has tried Iraqis who are accused of committing genocide and other crimes against humanity during the late Saddam Hussein's rule between 1968 and 2003. He is here on the Cornell campus, as I said, as a Clark Fellow, has been interacting with a great many people and a number of groups on campus. As I understand it, is also working on a book that will look at the Iraqi High Tribunal and Saddam Hussein's trial. Has been a great resource for people here at Cornell, and we're fortunate to have him here in Ithaca and with us here this afternoon. Finally, going forth on our panel will be Michael O'Hanlon, who is Senior Fellow in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution, where he specializes in U.S. defense strategy, the use of military force, homeland security, and American foreign policy. He is also, I believe, Mike, visiting lecturer at Princeton, which is where he got his, I think, all of his degrees, certainly his PhD, and where, rumor has it, he spent a great many hours, I won't say wasted many hours, but he spent a great many hours on the tennis court playing against, among others, our own Nick Van der Wal. He is the author of and co-author of too many books to list, but recent ones includes The New Politics of National Security, A War Like No Other, which is concerned with the U.S.-China relationship and Taiwan, Protecting the Homeland 2006/7, Defense Strategy for the Post-Saddam Era, which is 2005. He has also appeared on television or spoken on the radio, I'm interested to note, more than 1,000 times, which is just a few hundred more than I think the rest of us perhaps here. But we are very pleased to have him with us here and to be our fourth speaker. And with that, let me turn it over to the ambassador. Do you wish to? From there? Perhaps.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope nobody remembers what I said 2 years ago. I certainly don't, so I feel free to say the opposite of what I said two years ago. You know, the question out of Iraq seems to be taking one perspective of addressing the issue of Iraq. The issue of Iraq is not only of concern to the Americans and the Iraqi people, it has become of concern to the entire world. And there is two main perspectives, two ways of approaching the issue. And it's very important to see where do you start? What is your angle? Iraq is a mess. Iraq has been all but destroyed. You've mentioned the casualties that have been suffered by the Americans. The money, I think, is staggering. I think now they are spending something like $12 billion a month in Iraq. The casualties in Iraq, unfortunately, nobody counted them. Mr. McGovern wrote a little book, a remarkable little book about 3 years ago, and his estimate was that 600,000 Iraqis had been killed. Now, a lot of people think not 85,000, but 1 million Iraqis have been killed. What I think everybody agrees on is that you have up to 5 million Iraqis that have been displaced. Perhaps 2.5 million as internally displaced and 2.5 million as refugees. So this is the magnitude of the tragedy, not to call it something else. So what is it that you want to discuss? Do you want to discuss how you fix Iraq, how you help the people of Iraq out of this mess that was imposed on them? Or do you want to discuss as your main subject how the Americans get out of the mess they have created for themselves? Of course, you will be talking on both issues, but I think it's terribly important to see which is the important one for you. I think I hardly say that, as far as I'm concerned, the important issue is really how to help the people of Iraq regain their independence, regain their dignity, and put an end to the terrible situation in which they find themselves as a result of this invasion and occupation. If you address properly, I think if, since we are talking about what the American president should do, if you address properly this issue, the American problems will be solved as a given, as a consequence of that. If Iraq becomes all right, then I think the Americans will have solved their problem, which they created themselves in Iraq and because of Iraq. If, on the contrary, your main concern is about what the Americans did to themselves and how they should get out of this mess, you may help Iraq, but you may not. Because, after all, one way of solving the problem of the United States, and this has been said, and you have read it, and you have heard it, is, okay, just let's get out and forget about Iraq. So this is, I think, terribly important to remember that I think that the United States is honor-bound not to extract itself out of the problem it has created, but to really work with others to solve the problems that they have created. That is one. Two, the approach of the Americans should start by recognizing that not only invading Iraq was wrong, but practically everything that has been done by the United States until now has been wrong. If you don't recognize that there is a problem, you can't solve it. And what we have been hearing recently is that there's victory, that we are doing well, that democracy is flourishing in Iraq. If you say that, then there is no problem, and therefore there is no problem to solve. I think you've got to start by recognizing that the policy has been wrong. And that what you need now is a new policy for Iraq. That new policy, again, what was wrong about it was that it was unilaterally put together by the Americans. When I used to talk with some American friends, including some in the administration, and tell them, you've got to cooperate with others in the region, they used to say, but we ask the people in the region there to support, to work with us to solve the problems in Iraq, and they don't want to. I tell them what you are telling them is, this is our policy, please come and support us. And what they are telling you, perhaps shyly, not clearly enough, is that your policy is wrong, we cannot support it. So I hope that the new administration is not going to write also in Washington alone a new policy and go to the Iraqis and the region and say, here is the new policy. It's better than the past one. You've got to support it. I think they have got to go to everybody and say, let's get together and work out a policy that will serve the interests of Iraq and the interests of the United States and the interests of everybody else. And that is doable. The third point is that I'm sure that if the people in the new administration don't know it, and I don't see how they can't know it, but if they don't, they'll find out soon enough. The Americans have 150,000 soldiers in Iraq. They spend $12 billion a month, but their influence has been diminishing by the day in Iraq. Iran has infinitely more influence in Iraq than the United States has. This is a fact. This is a reality. Therefore, you cannot solve the problems in Iraq and in the region without talking to Iran. And I'm very glad that the atmospheric seems to be changing in Washington, and that talking to Iran is now very much on the agenda. But talking to Iran, there are a lot of bilateral issues that the Americans have with Iran, and those they should be talked about bilaterally. But the problems of Iraq cannot be talked about, cannot be solved by the United States and Iran alone. Definitely the people of Iraq has to be center stage. They have got to have to be the main partner in this in the establishment of the new policy, but not only the Iraqis, but also other countries in the region. The Middle East is in extremely serious trouble, and it always happens like this. When you have a problem somewhere, you cannot bottle it down in that country forever. It will necessarily spill over. And Iraq is spilling over all over the place. And it is connecting with other problems that existed before Iraq. You have the Israeli-Palestinian problem. You have the problems in Lebanon. You have the problem in Afghanistan. And the problem in Afghanistan has now connected with the problems in Pakistan. So I think that the next administration has a lot on its plate on these issues, and that Iraq must be a priority, but Iraq must be a priority and it must be seen in its context, in its regional context, in the narrow Middle East and in the wider Middle East. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a great honor to be here and to share the podium with such a distinguished group of commentators and in some instances practitioners of diplomacy. My role here as a contemporary historian is to think a little bit about the issue of withdrawal from Iraq on the American part. I recently played a little Ambrose Bierce and did some dictionary entries and defined withdrawal as one way of avoiding the worst consequences of a pleasurable conquest, noting that often it's accomplished too late to avoid long years of support payments. So can the U.S. government, can the U.S. military get out of Iraq? And I think the second part of that question is, without all hell breaking loose and gasoline going to $15 a gallon and that sort of thing, can the U.S. get out of Iraq without facing enormous economic and diplomatic and political conquests? Iraq is at the head of the Persian Gulf, and the Persian Gulf contains something like 2/3 of the world's proven petroleum reserves and nearly half of its natural gas. 40% of all the petroleum that's exported in the world goes out through the mouth of the Persian Gulf. So this is not, I'm sure Vietnam is a very nice country. I haven't been there. But the United States really could get out of Vietnam under the worst circumstances in 1975, and nothing bad happened, I think, to the United States. Horrible things happened in Southeast Asia, but nothing bad happened to the United States. I think some rubber interests may have been damaged, but aside from that, Iraq's not like that. You couldn't afford to get out and have all hell break loose. No U.S. government, including the Obama administration, could risk the Persian Gulf going up in flames. So let's think a little bit about, well, what would be the practical implications of a U.S. military withdrawal? First of all, one question is, could the al-Maliki government survive? And last year this time, if I came and had come and given a talk here, I would have said no. And in fact, I'm a kind of a left-of-center blogger. People speak well of me at Daily Kos and so forth. And I've been in trouble with my own constituency because they want me to come out and tell them everything will be fine. And everything won't be fine. So a year ago, I would have said no, al-Maliki couldn't survive. As I speak to you today, I'm beginning to think he could. He could survive the withdrawal of the bulk of the U.S. infantry and armored forces. Now, why do I say that? Well, first of all, the Sunni Arab guerrilla movement in 2004, 2005, I think at some points was very close to taking Baghdad. It had a great deal of support from its own hinterland in Al-Anbar province, Nineveh, Diyala. And there were instances of actual guerrilla action inside the Green Zone, which the U.S. administration covered up. Now, as we speak, in 2006, 2007, one of the great unappreciated stories of Iraq has been that the Shiite militias succeeded in ethnically cleansing the Sunni Arabs from Baghdad. Baghdad was probably something like 50-50 Sunni and Shiite in 2003 when the U.S. invaded. It is now 75 to 80% Shiite. When we say that there are 4.7 million displaced persons in Iraq, a very large number of them are former Baghdadi Sunnis. UCLA had a scientific team that looked at ambient light from Iraqi cities. And they found that West Baghdad has gone dark. And it went dark in late 2006 and has stayed dark. And this is not true of Mosul. It's not true of Basra. It's not true of East Baghdad. It's something peculiar to West Baghdad. And why is it dark is because those people now live in Syria and some other parts of Iraq. So the likelihood of the Sunni Arabs, of the guerrilla movement among the Sunni Arabs, and it's a diverse movement. It has Muslim radicals in it. It has ex-Baathists in it. Some of it's tribal. The likelihood of it taking over Baghdad now has declined enormously because they lost the battle for Baghdad. And I think the U.S. military, without meaning to, may have contributed to this phenomenon because I think when they did the surge, they disarmed the Sunnis first. When the Sunnis were disarmed, then they were sitting ducks for the Shiite militias. Now, the Sunni Arab guerrilla movement can go on blowing things up, and I don't know who did the bombing today, because that was in a Sunni Arab neighborhood. It might have been Shiite militias, but they can be a source of instability, but they can't take over. The Shiite Badr Corps, trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and I can't entirely explain this to you, but for some reason, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the sort of National Guard of the Khomeinist government of Iran, has been designated by President Bush at the insistence of 77 senators as a terrorist organization. Now, this doesn't make much sense to me because the definition of terrorism is non-state actors deploying violence against civilians for political purposes. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards, not a non-state actor. And they're accused mainly of being involved in killing U.S. troops who are not civilians. So I don't think they're a terrorist group. They might be bad, but not all bad people are terrorists. The Badr Corps is the paramilitary of the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq, the most powerful political force in especially southern Iraq, but it really at the top of the Iraqi government that was elected twice in 2005. The Badr Corps was trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, was incorporated into the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, was part of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards until it came back to Iraq out of exile from Iran in spring of 2003. It's been a mainstay of the Bush administration. People in Washington who are jealous of FaceTime with the president, or at least they used to be jealous of FaceTime with the president, complained bitterly that the Badr Corps representative in Washington was always over for barbecue. So just remember, Badr Corps, Shiite, paramilitary, trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, good. Iranian Revolutionary Guards, bad. I can't explain this. I can't see much difference between them, except one is allied with the United States now in a marriage of convenience. They could be a challenge to the Iraqi government, but in fact, they have been incorporated into the Iraqi military and police in very large numbers, and more have been incorporated in the course of this present year. And they seem entirely willing to take orders from Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, as he has broken with their political enemies and aligned with them. And so Hadi al-Amri, the head of the Badr organization, has been taking stances often in support of al-Maliki. So I don't see them overthrowing the government. The Mahdi army of Muqtada Sadr, a different group of Shiite activists, the Badr Corps, largely expatriates, I would say probably more middle and upper middle class and so forth in their origins, whereas the Mahdi army, much more ghetto, very poor, nativist, very anti-Iranian in many ways. And it, of course, has been an element of instability in Iraq, has fought U.S. Marines as well as fighting sometimes the Badr Corps and the Iraqi military. In the past year, it has largely stood down. It's mysterious to me why it has stood down. It's clearly an organization in a great deal of turmoil as a result, a great deal of questioning as to its future and its raison d'etre. But it has stood down. There have been some reports in the Iraqi press that it stood down at Iran's insistence, that the Iranians became convinced that the Mahdi army's paramilitary activities and attacks on U.S. and British troops were actually determining the U.S. and the U.K. to stay in Iraq, that only if things settled down in Iraq could you make an argument to the U.S. military and its allies to leave, and so therefore the Iranians put enormous pressure on the Mahdi army to settle down. In any case, the al-Maliki government has suddenly shown some spine, and in the past 8 months has taken on the Mahdi army where it didn't settle down, and sent the Iraqi army down to Basra and managed to make it stick. Defeated Mahdi army elements in Hayaniya and other poor neighborhoods in Basra, then sent the army into Amara, which is very much Sudras territory, very, very much Mahdi Army territory, made it stick, arrested a lot of Sudras, and the Butter Corps was a very important part of this operation. So they've now been rewarded by being incorporated into the military more strongly. And then Sadr City itself was invaded by the U.S., by the Iraqi military with U.S. close air support with, I think, some success. I mean, it's not that the Mahdi Army has disappeared. I mean, the Mahdi Army is ghetto youth with guns, some of whom have had training allegedly in Iran itself or even in Lebanon. But I think mostly, you know, fighting Marines is really good training, assuming you survive. They nevertheless have been forced to go underground. So al-Maliki's got control of the military now in a way that he didn't have control of it before. There was a lot of bureaucratic infighting. The Iraqi government is a spoils system, and each ministry is given away to political parties which are in the parliament. So al-Maliki didn't initially have control of the Ministry of Defense or of the Ministry of Interior. There's increasing evidence that he does have greater control of it, and he's set up these military kind of field headquarters which report directly to him. So he's at the top of the line of command now, and he seems to be making it stick. A final threat, not to the overthrow of the government, but to the government's control of the country, is the Peshmerga, or the paramilitary of Kurdistan. The Kurdistan Regional Government is a confederacy of 3 Iraqi provinces in North Iraq. There has been conflict between the Iraqi military and the Peshmerga in recent months, and indeed there was hot firing between the two in August in Diyala. But one thing I would say about the Peshmerga is that they are an element in the Kurds defending their semi-autonomy. They're not a threat to the overthrow of the government, and moreover, the U.S. military is useless for this particular conflict because the U.S. military is very deeply indebted to the Peshmerga. It is, on the other hand, duty-bound to support the government in Baghdad. So if there was conflict between the Kurds and the Shiites, I don't see how the U.S. could get involved. So since the Iraqi infantry is now functioning, apparently, in places like Basra and Amara, East Baghdad, and so forth, I don't think the U.S. infantry is so much needed anymore. And even the Iraqi armored corps seems to be being deployed. I saw pictures of tanks down in Amara, sort of military armored vehicles and so forth. So the bulk of the U.S. forces in Iraq is infantry and armor. If they're not so much needed, you could get a lot of those guys out. So what is needed? Well, you know, the Iraqi military still needs the U.S. military for air support. It needs the U.S. military for logistics. But both of those needs should decline over the next 3 years. And in fact, by 2012, Iraq is expecting 500 high-powered jets and so forth to be delivered. Of course, it takes time to train people on those and so forth. So I think the goal of getting the U.S. entirely out of Iraq in 2010 is not reasonable, but getting the bulk of U.S. forces out of Iraq by then and mainly providing air support and logistical support is possible. The final issue is the issue of neighbors. And again, I don't see the United States being so useful in a lot of those border disputes. The Turks have attacked northern Iraq repeatedly while the U.S. has been there and indeed at one point sent troops into Iraq. The Turks are a NATO ally. And the U.S. apparently has been giving them real-time intelligence which has helped them to attack Iraq. So if somebody comes to me and says, well, we need to be there to protect Iraq's borders, well, I think we're kind of undermining that with our present activities. Saudi Arabia has gotten very afraid of vigilante fundamentalists who operate in Iraq and then come back and blow things up in Saudi Arabia. They've done a much better job in cracking down on that kind of thing. And then, the big question for Americans is Iran's future in Iraq, and does the U.S. need to be in Iraq to protect Iraq from Iran? And this is kind of, a mildly, darkly humorous question, because the United States presided over the coming to power in Iraq of highly pro-Iranian political forces. And the Iranians are doing a lot of business with Iraq, and they're building an airport near the holy city of Najaf, which will bring in millions of pilgrims from Iran to Iraq every year. So, basically my message about that is that if the U.S. didn't want Iran to be influential in Iraq, then it shouldn't have overthrown Saddam Hussein. That cow is now out of the barn, and you just have to get used to it. So my own feeling is a very substantial U.S. military withdrawal from Iraq over the next few years is entirely plausible. There's not good evidence to me any longer that the Iraqi government is in danger of being overthrown by any of the major political forces in Iraq, nor that the Iraqi military any longer needs U.S. infantry and armor in order to operate. I don't think we'll be out in 2010 or 2011 altogether, but I think there is some prospect of an orderly withdrawal from Iraq. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's been an honor to be with you this afternoon, and it is a really complicated subject to talk about Iraq after 6 years. And also, maybe you agree all, we have to raise some point. Ambassador Brahimi and Professor Cole mentions some points, and we talk about all in same points, but each one talking different view. Because there is a problem on the ground in Iraq, and U.S. and Iraqi government involved in this problem, and both looking for solutions. The best solution, and move forward, you have to create stability in Iraq. And the question about the stability, how to create the stability is there. That's the biggest question now, because after that, we can move forward. Here is two questions in my mind. First question is, does the United States want to or need special relation with Iraq? That's one. Second also, can the United States be more active dealing with the peace, with the challenges of Iran and the Arab-Israel peace process if they shift from Iraq and focus in other areas? Here, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but here the main problems. To create stability and move forward to have peace there and new dialogue with the Middle East. If we focus on Iraq, Iraq now has two conflicts, outside and inside. Outside, there's conflict came from Iran, other countries, to inside Iraq. And we have to have negotiation, we have to have relation from Iraq and other countries. Iraq is not island. Iraq is country, and there is around him 6 countries. There is Iran, there is Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Saudi, and Kuwait. And frankly, Iraq has this problem with half of them now. Iran, Syria, and 1991 with Kuwait, and also with Turkey now. Because Turkey, not daily, maybe weekly, have military operation north of Iraq in Kurdistan. And that's also unacceptable issues if we have independent country. To have stability and to have good relation, we have to talk with them. Not as enemies, no, as neighbors. Forever. From 1981, when they established Iraq as an independent country, and forever. And to have good relation with them. Also, I think a new president in the United States will face another conflict inside Iraq, which is Iraqi conflict. And that is more complicated because Iraq, it's a mosaic country. There is more than 3 languages. There is multiple ethnics Arab and other Kurd, Turkmen, other issues. There is Muslim and non-Muslims, and all of them is live in Iraq. There is conflict between Arab and Kurd. And in the middle, Turkmen. Because they're stuck between Arab and Kurd. They live in Kirkuk, and Kirkuk between Arab and Kurd. And they're stuck in the middle. Kirkuk is very rich place. Oil, natural sources, natural gas, and also Kurdish people in Kurdistan, believe it is part of Kurdish region. And Saddam changed the societies there when they moved the Kurdish and replaced them with the Arab. And they have some evidence to that, support that. And now they're asking to return Kirkuk also. People living in Kirkuk, they called Turkmen. They came from Turkmenistan. And they speak Turkmen languages. That's one hand. Arab and Kurd Turkmen conflict inside Iraq. Second, Arab, let me say, is more exact. Muslim conflict. Because if I said Arab, I will ignore the minorities. There is Muslims conflict. How many conflicts there? There is two conflicts here. Power and identity. Power. Sunni Shi'i. History and the future. From 1921, the government in Iraq is Sunni until 2003. Now, we have election, and election run by majorities. Majority in Iraq is Shia now, and the government is Shia. That's one part of the conflict. Excuse me, I will just raise some question because it's a really short time. If I go over each one, we need a lot of time to talk, you know. Maybe you need hours to just what the best options in each one. Anyway, inside the Shia, there is conflict also. There's conflict between, as my friends mentioned, Iski, Badr, and Muqtada Sadr group, Al-Mahdi's army. Who's the leader? And some independent, not independent, some people in the middle, you know, stuck in the middle between, that's conflict. Sunni, there is also conflict now between Islamic Party and the Sahwa groups. The Sahwa say we are independent from Islamic Party and we will run for the new election as independent. And also they are raising some problems against some Sunnis. Just count with me. Outside conflict, inside conflict. Inside Arab, Muslim, Sunni, Shi'i, Sunni. We have another problems also, majority and minorities. There is non-Muslim in Iraq. There is Christian, Jewish, Sabia, Mandan, Yazidi, and others. Now some Muslims dismiss them. I have no evidence who did that now in Iraq. But in reality, they start to leave Iraq now. I don't know who has this agenda in Iraq to do that. That's one part of the problem in Iraq. If we look back a little bit to the history, just 30 or 40 decades, 1970, and look to the United States relation with the Middle East. The biggest friend in that time is Iran during Nixon administration. And I support Iranian because Middle East is very important location. To have peace there, you have to have good relation with some key countries there. One of these countries, Iraq, and also Iran and Egypt. Carter administration, he has relation with Egypt and they created peace agreement between Egypt and Israel. This is the second shift or second point in my question. How that's work? How can new president of the United States continue in this process if they shift from Iraq and focus on the peace process between Israel and Arab? They have to work and continue the peace process between Palestine and Israel, and must have two countries, two states there. After that, many or most of the Arab countries will support Palestine, and also maybe they will have a relationship with Israel, and also they will support peace there. Good relation in Iraq, strong government, continue to finish this work, will help to create peace there. Because Iraq now in the middle, between Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and imagine this area, just imagine. If you have, not giant, if you have strong relations, strong country, middle, and move. Can you move with the peace or not? If you don't have it, also what are the other options? I think other options is, my friends and Mr. Brahimi has mentioned, maybe some other countries will jumping inside Iraq and create the problem for the Middle East. Third, there is a lot unfinished work now in Iraq. When the United States came to Iraq 2003, they established and work with the Iraqi government, with the region. You know? And that work now in middle. Part of that is peace, part of that is economic, part of that is relation, relationship with the region in the Middle East. Also, after September 11, until now, American dialogue just changed a little bit with Islamic countries. And I think a new administration need to start a new dialogue now with Islamic countries to continue this process. How to create that? You have to have good relation with key countries. Who's the key countries in this area? It's two, Saudi and Iraq. Saudi, the leader of the Sunnis, and Iraq, the leader of the Shia. Yes, there is two schools of the Shia's school, one in Najaf, one in Iran. But the majority within Najaf now, which is school in Najaf is more than 1,000 years ago. This all points will face new president. For these reasons, I think a new president will continue involved in Iraq to finish all work they just started. Because sooner or later, in this administrative or next administrative, Iraq will have agreement with the United States, security agreement, it's called the SOFA agreement. Whatever is this, it's this government or next government. Also, I think to continue to establish strong Iraqi government and stop all the militia, United States will make some pressures, more pressure on the Iraqi government, just to create it more power, more identity. And they will work with Iraq as a friend and as a partner, Middle East, to continue there. But sooner or later, will see there is no more, military soldiers in Iraq, but must be there is strong relation, because Iraq location is very important to have peace, Middle East. Second, economic problems, which I mean is oil and other energies there. It's also very important. Third, to establish a new dialogue with the new countries, Islamic countries, you have to have good relation with Shia and Sunnah, and the key countries also, it's Iraq and Egypt. Fourth, Iraq, one of the key countries now in Arab field. For all of these, I think United States will continue with Iraq, but with a new policy, with a new strategy. Thank you so much.
It's an honor to be here. I feel a little self-conscious speaking after people who I think of in terms like Babe Ruth, Michael Jordan, and Joe Montana for their respective contributions to this field. Thank you very much for the honor of being part of this panel. We've heard a lot of very thoughtful commentary already, and there's not too much that I would disagree with. We're, I know, trying to have both a discussion and a debate. So let me try primarily, since I'm the last speaker, just to do a couple of things. One is just for the sake of keeping a little debate in the discussion, to find a couple of specific points to challenge, in the spirit really of just identifying some contentious issues that are hard to resolve definitively one way or another. And then the other thing I'd like to do is just spell out a little bit of a scenario for what could still go wrong. The remarkable thing is that we are all agreeing, I think, and perhaps my fellow panelists will challenge this summary of what we've been saying so far today, but we're all agreeing things are far improved in Iraq, and that there's the basis for a withdrawal based on, if not victory, then at least some level of salvaging what had been a horrible situation. And so that much, I think, is more or less a basis for our understanding. And you could almost say, by the way, it's a great tribute to you that you've all come out on a cold November night to listen to this conversation when a lot of Americans have had enough of Iraq. And it sort of sounds like, we can just gradually get out and we'll be okay, and we all sort of agree on that. Well, what could still go wrong? And so I want to give you a scenario for what I think could still go wrong in Iraq, especially if we withdraw a little too fast. So those are the two things I'd like to do briefly. In terms of points of contention, I promised you that there weren't that many, and let me just identify a couple. And I'm not sure, frankly, that they're all that crucial to debating future policy. But one has to do with the death toll in Iraq of the last 5 or 6 years. And Ambassador Brahimi mentioned that some estimates are as high as 1 million. I certainly agree we've seen far too much violence in Iraq. I'm the last person to defend the way in which the United States went into this war, the way in which we failed to prepare properly for the necessary challenge of any stabilization effort after you overthrow a sovereign country's government. And therefore, our performance in that first couple of years was, to my mind, unconscionably bad. But all the estimates that I've seen that have been done in a scrupulous manner, that have been built up through eyewitness estimates, have been in the range of 100,000 to 200,000 civilians killed. Now, admittedly, you're not going to count everyone, but Iraq is a place where there has been a large international presence of journalists, especially in the early years, by the way, when some of these estimates were really escalating so fast, of military personnel, of international diplomats, of a coalition force that is increasingly just American, but has had a number of other countries as well. And so I simply do not believe that the death toll of the last 5 years is comparable to the cumulative death toll of all of the Saddam years put together, which is what that 1 million estimate would have us believe. The reason I mention this is because sometimes I believe this kind of a number makes Americans lose any and all heart in their ability to do difficult and dangerous things around the world, whether it's in Iraq or now Afghanistan or potentially other places. And while I think the mission in Iraq has gone very badly, I do not believe there is a solid basis for this kind of a high estimate. That may be more of an historical point or a philosophical point than anything else. But let me also mention one observation in regard to Iran. I don't believe, even though we should talk to Iran, that talking to Iran will be a key part of the solution in Iraq. The key reason why we're seeing things go better in Iraq now, I believe, is because the Iraqi army and police and political organs of government are now operating with much more confidence and effectiveness, and they are often the ones who are uncovering the Iranians' weapons caches, uncovering the Iranians' efforts to fund militants, uncovering what Iran has been up to, which is very much a double game or a triple game of trying to maintain allegiance to some of their former protégés they sheltered in their country, trying to give them financial support, trying to give them weapons to maintain a certain level of ongoing instability, and then assassinating the Iraqi politicians they don't like from time to time. I think Iran's role has been entirely cynical and nefarious throughout this. Now, you can blame the Bush administration if you wish, and I would do so myself, for being part of the reason why Iran turned so much against any American-led project. And I do believe Ambassador Brahimi and others did remarkably good work with Iran in Afghanistan, showing what was possible when we found a basis for cooperation between our countries. Unfortunately, that's now a different time long ago. It predated President Ahmadinejad in Iran. It predated the Bush administration's axis of evil policy, which I disagree with and think was counterproductive. But I do not think that Iran will be a key part of the answer in Iraq. The good news, to my mind, is that Iraqi politicians themselves, I think, are beginning to figure out that Iran is playing a double game. They do want to have a tolerably decent relationship with Iran if possible, but they're also aware of the amount of cynicism that's involved in Iranian policy, the amount of willingness to claim they're trying to be peacemakers on the one hand while funneling weaponry and money to militias on the other. And finally, the Maliki-led government has become strong enough that they're able to ultimately challenge the militias that are the most unsettling, the most destabilizing in this regard. So we should still talk to Iran for two reasons. One, I could be wrong, and I'm just giving you my best assessment. I'm not claiming it's fact that Iran will not help. I don't think they'll help, but I'd love to be proven wrong. And secondly, even if I'm right, the simple process of attempting to work with Iran will show that we have better intentions than many people have attributed to us in the past. So in some cases, you negotiate not in any expectation of success, but in the recognition that failure is a necessary precondition for getting to where you need to go next. And so if we've shown the world that we are acting in good faith to try to work with with Iraq's neighbors, and one or more of them are not cooperating, at least we'll have a little bit less of the tolerance for the actions of countries like Iran that we've sometimes seen in the international community. So I guess I wind up agreeing on the policy proposal with Ambassador Brahimi. I just don't want to put a lot of stock in the likelihood of Tehran helping us. The good news is, as I say, we have a lot of Iraqis who are coming to these observations on their own. They're often now the ones, because of their army going into these difficult cities and neighborhoods that Juan Cole discussed, they're the ones finding the weapons caches. They're the ones figuring out who has the links back to Iran. They're the ones who are often uncovering the evidence that disproves the Iranian contention that they're trying to be peacemakers in this country. Okay, enough of the anti-Iran diatribe. I promise I really would like to get along with them. I'm just skeptical that we will. And so let's not put too much hope in that. But that's about the best I can do at debating my co-panelists, because I agree with 95% of all of what they've said and admire 100% of what they've done in their careers. So let me now, just for the sake of hopefully making the transition to our broader discussion with you, lay out a scenario of how I think an overly rapid American exit from Iraq could be dangerous. And I think in some ways this is becoming the greater risk, for the simple reason that, of course, Senator Obama is president-elect, and he has campaigned, as we have been discussing, on this idea of getting all the combat formations out by roughly April or May of 2010. Now, the main problem with this, before I spell out the scenario, is that a lot of things are still undone in Iraq. You've seen remarkable progress in many areas of legislation, many areas of military operations, but as the distinguished judge was just mentioning moments ago, a lot of things still have to happen, like more than 4 million displaced persons have to either come home or find somewhere else to live, because almost none of them are in permanently acceptable housing or locations right now. The oil law in Iraq needs to be worked out. And right now, the bad news here is that the Sunni bloc in Iraq sits on the least oil and knows it. And they are also, in many ways, at least historically, the best armed, the best organized. And as Juan Cole said, back at least 3-4 years ago, we're perhaps even on the verge of being able to take power in Iraq or have make a decent shot at waging a successful civil war. Maybe they can't even contemplate that idea in the future, I don't know, but it was recent enough that I still worry. Until the Sunnis feel they have some share of the oil in Iraq, some guaranteed share, I worry. Okay, so let me just spell out this scenario now, building on a couple of these points. 2009 is a big election year in Iraq, as you probably know. There are provincial elections scheduled for January. They may slip to February or a little later than that. That's the current expectation is maybe February 20th. It's the latest date that I've heard. But after that, you have to have national elections in the late part of 2009. Well, elections in young democracies, I don't need to tell a crowd like this, are dangerous. It's a sort of a rule of political science that you don't really start to feel a democracy is established until after the second successful election and the transition of power from one leader to another, because people still have an uncertainty about how the process is going to work. Here we have Prime Minister al-Maliki. He's had great success in the last year, and I'm very glad for it. It's much better than the alternative of watching how he had floundered in 2007 continue. But he's had great success. But he sits atop a very fragile coalition. He is the representative of the so-called Dawa Party that I believe has 25 seats in parliament. Nothing close to the majority needed to form a government. So in other words, unless he can cobble together, as he has in the past, a coalition government, his position in power is going to be subject to defeat in the elections of late 2009. Okay, how is Maliki going to feel about that? The one institution that really works in Iraq is the army, and to some extent the national police. And the judge and others are trying to build up other institutions of Iraq, but that's going more slowly. So Maliki will have gotten used to being able to control this institution of power. And then through a democratic process that we expect him to honor, all of a sudden he's going to be asked to step aside. Through a voting process that if we're withdrawing 1 to 2 brigades per month, as promised by Senator Obama, could be marred by a lot of fraud and a lot of violence. So you have a voting process taking place in 2009 in which there's violence, people get nervous about the security vacuum that could result, they start coming back to their sectarian bases as they did in 2005 when the elections divided people, and they did not unify people in 2005. And then you have to wonder, is Maliki really going to be willing to step down at a time when the security forces, by the way, have gotten used to obeying him? And many of them are getting, accustomed to the idea that Maliki in charge and us sort of the best institution in the country, this sort of works. Do we really want to go back to the risks of 05, 06? So I think you could see an election process that leads to a campaign in which people divide each other apart. There's, in other words, rhetoric that is incendiary, where people promise to their own sectarian groups the spoils of power, oil revenue, and so forth. And we see elections in our country that can be divisive as well, so we know it's possible, even in a more established democracy. And then people wonder if they want to respect the outcome of this process. And if you think I'm just making this up, consider the issues that are still outstanding over which they will be debating, discussing, and perhaps fighting in the course of this political process. I already mentioned the issue of oil. That's bad enough just as an abstract concept. But then think about the area that the judge mentioned in the northern part of Iraq around the city of Kirkuk, where Kurds, Turkoman, and many Arabs all contest the same land. There is no process that they've agreed on by which we will figure out who even is supposed to be in charge of those lands. Should they be Kurdistan, or should they be Iraq proper, the other 15 provinces, the main part of the country? The oil within those provinces and in the regions around Kirkuk, should this oil be shared by everyone? Should the revenue be allocated according to the same rules that people have been allocating revenue so far? The Constitution is ambiguous on this point. It talks about future oil development being allocated and future oil revenue being shared in a different way from existing revenue, or from existing wells. And therefore, there is uncertainty. And meanwhile, there is a huge zone where the Kurds meet Arab and Turkoman Iraq that's contested. And where, as was mentioned on August 25th, there was almost a firefight this very year. So that issue is unresolved. As these 4 million people start to come home, there is the danger that you will rekindle the same ethnic cleansing process that occurred when they were driven out. Because if they come home to a house that somebody else is living in, there are a lot of things that could happen in that situation that are unpleasant. Unless the rule of law is working so well as to resolve those cases quickly and compensate whoever is asked to leave that house, then you don't have a working system. However, so far we've had maybe 100,000, 150,000 people returned home successfully by the workings of the normal Iraqi legal system, as I understand it. I'd be fascinated to know if Judge Hamadi Al-Saiedi would agree. I think we need a new mechanism in Iraq that helps resolve these cases more quickly and that helps compensate the losers in any kind of a property dispute more quickly and more correctly so they can go off and find a different house. Or we have the potential for conflict within that kind of process. One last dynamic that you're, again, I'm sure aware of, for those of you who follow this issue carefully, that is still, at this moment, very, very unsettled, is the future of the Sons of Iraq program, where now the Iraqi government has taken responsibility for paying about half these people. As you know, there are about 100,000 mostly Sunni volunteers that we formed contracts with. And the United States military went out and said, if you patrol these checkpoints, instead of us being at war with you, why don't we make a deal? We'll pay you to do that as long as you do honor your commitment. And if you don't honor your commitment, we're back at war. And we're going to do individual contracts with 200 individual tribes in order to have a system that essentially puts responsibility at the level that people can be controlled by their tribal leader. That's the existing Sons of Iraq program. Only last month did the Iraqi government begin to take ownership of that program. Up until then, we, the Americans, were paying all those 100,000 people, and we were the ones who had to go in and occasionally read the Iraqi Prime Minister the Riot Act to get him to hire some of these people into the government because he didn't really trust them. Now, he has brought back some former Ba'athist professionals, one by one, to run the army and police, or at least many of the units within those institutions, but Maliki is nervous about these Sons of Iraq. So that process could come undone in the middle of a sectarian campaign that is inflamed by people's worst-case worries about what's going to happen when the Americans go. And especially if we've agreed that the plan is set in concrete and cannot be modified, which has been part of what Senator Obama, and now part of what some of the Iraqi leaders have wanted to say. I think we have the potential for the election season to be very unsettled. So in conclusion, I think we need to go slow in 2009 and help that new Iraqi government be elected and be ushered into office, establish itself, have a peaceful transition of power. I'm not saying we should stay at the 14 brigades that we'll soon be at throughout the entire year 2009. And in the discussion, I hope we get into Afghanistan a bit more because I recognize there are other needs for American forces. But I think we've seen such an important progress in such an important country that we want to be a little bit careful about rushing the thing. Now, obviously, if the Iraqis just tell us to go, as we've been hearing some of them want to tell us in recent weeks and months as part of the status of forces agreement, we have to leave. But my guess is some of that is political, much of that is political in Iraq, and pragmatists will say it's probably better to take 3 or 4 U.S. brigades out of Iraq in 2009, not 8 or 10. And from that point onward, I would hope for a more rapid transition. But I think 2009 should be the year of steady as she goes. After all, President-elect Obama has enough things he absolutely must do starting in January. I would propose to him that he sort of let this strategy stay in place a little longer. We're already on a gradual down path. We will have taken 6 brigades out in the space of 12 months before his inauguration. I think more or less that same gradual down path is a good one to stay on, and we should not accelerate it too much. Thanks.
Well, I want to thank all 4 of our panelists, and we want to have an opportunity now for some discussion. And before we turn to general Q&A from all of you, and we will do that in fairly short order, I wonder if I could ask a general question of the 4 of you, and it's really directed at all of you. It contradicts perhaps what Mike has just finished saying. Mike might want to take it, but it's really one directed at all of you. And the question is, I suppose, to quote the immortal words of Senator George Aiken, why not declare victory and go home? And it's a question that I'm coming to in the context of American policy here, since that's the primary concern of this panel. But in listening to all of you, it seems as though we have increased stability, maybe not quite where we need to go, but we have increased stability. I have heard the Ambassador Brahimi say that American influence has diminished. By implication, it seems to me that all four of you are suggesting that the surge, since it hasn't really been talked about, that the surge has in fact not been key to the improvement, although we could talk about that if anybody wants to. When you then add in the number of casualties that we've seen, and let's focus here on the American side, we're at 4,200, I think, at the moment. When you think about the cost, $10 or $12 billion a month that the administration, the United States, is now spending in Iraq, if you consider that perhaps resentment on the part of many Iraqis against the United States will not in fact disappear until you have disengagement. And finally, the need obviously to shift resources, as Mike said, towards, or perhaps implied towards the end in terms of the needs in Afghanistan. Why not, if you were President-elect Obama, commence full withdrawal right away in January of 2009, understanding that, of course, logistically it takes, as we've said, probably 16, 18 months for it to happen. Why not do it? Mike, would you?
I'll be brief since I've just had the podium, but I think, to be clear, and thanks for the opportunity, the surge was extraordinarily successful, but the surge should not be understood as simply the addition of American forces. The surge was a concept of protecting the Iraqi population. That's what made it work. And it was a joint effort of American and Iraqi forces, unified effort. In fact, I just tried to do a little argument along these lines, defining surge as an acronym. And instead of just a surge of American forces, S stands for emphasis on security. U stands for unity of effort. R stands for reconciliation, a process that's hardly complete. G stands for Iraqi government capacity, which is necessary and which is still being built. And then E stands for excellence of execution. If you think about it like that, you have to keep working to protect the Iraqi civilian population. That's the part of the strategy that does not change. Then the question is, can they do it on their own? And the answer is more and more, yes, but not 100%. And the bottom line is civil war could still resume. We're not yet at a point where all these tensions have been put aside. So the Iraqis aren't quite capable of doing it all on their own. We still need more reconciliation. We need to bring those sons of Iraq in. We need more government capacity. We need more ongoing training and excellence. And we need to remember that the civil war could still resume.
I want to just give example about the security now in Iraq. The violence is usually in Baghdad, before in Anbar, now it's nothing in Anbar. Now Baghdad, Yalan, Mosul. I'm from Baghdad. I spent all my life there. I know Baghdad like my hand. No? Now Baghdad is a little bit secure than before for two reasons. One, there is around 40,000 forces on the ground in Baghdad. Forces. And imagine, 40,000, just in Baghdad. Second, they divide Baghdad to small cities. Sadr city, which half of Baghdad population is living there. It's 3 million, around 3 million living there. Now, just imagine, if you want to go from that line to this line, you have just to cross. Now, in Sadr city, if you want to go to this, from that line to this line, you have to go to the door and move around and back. You know, T-walls everywhere. You know, I will give you an example. My home in Baghdad, in this side, and my cousin in that side. Now just 2 minutes between us. Now around 30 minutes driving by car to back to see my cousin. That issue means security is still not very good there. To move with this process, you have to have security plan, and also we have to have civil plan, not just troops. Because if you have troops forever, there is no security. You have to have negotiation and create Iraqi entity between all the Iraqis and capacity to work as a one country, one government, one society. And after that, you can take the steel walls off and move the troops.
Well, as I understand the question is, why not just declare victory and set in motion the troop withdrawal, which presumably will take some time to occur? Actually, I think that's what we've been doing for some time, and I'm a little bit puzzled that the American public doesn't seem to realize it. I mean, we have turned over security duties in, I think it's 12 of the 18 provinces, it's 13 of the 18 provinces to the Iraqi military. And U.S. troops are still in those provinces often, but outside the major cities, at bases, and they're only called in to the cities if there's an emergency that the Iraqi military can't handle. I think it's been a long time in, say, a city like Najaf since you've had a U.S. military patrol in the city. So they're there as a kind of hedge, but they're not actively fighting. And in fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that in October there were no U.S. Troops killed in hostile combat. Yeah. So that tells me that they're not at the front lines doing the hand-to-hand combat and so forth. So we've been turning over Iraq to the Iraqis for some time. And now, could you get to the point where, having moved outside Najaf, you could draw down? And I think you are. Well, my argument is you are getting to that point. And in fact, there were 4,000 British troops in Basra who weren't called upon by al-Maliki in his Basra campaign. And I think he was somewhat annoyed with them because he thought they'd made deals with the Mahdi army and so forth. So if he doesn't need the 4,000 troops in Basra in order to establish order in Basra, then, a lot of British backbenchers are asking, well, then why, don't we just bring them home? And I think the leaks are that they will be brought home in the course of 2009. So this is an ongoing process, and I think it will just go on. But here's why you don't just set it in motion and do it in lockstep. And here I agree with what I understood Michael Hanlon to say, is that we've sometimes turned over places to the Iraqi military, and it hasn't gone well in the aftermath. And I think we've turned over Mosul twice, if I'm not mistaken. And in each case, all hell broke loose in the aftermath, and we had to go right back in. So, there's Operation Mosul and so forth. So the reason that I would say you don't do that, you don't just declare you're getting out on a timetable and get out no matter what, is that there are some places where the Iraqi military just isn't up to the job for whatever reason, or where local conditions are not conducive, and then you have a choice. You really have a choice of letting Mosul just go up in flames. Now here's a very major city, 1.5 million in the northern part of Iraq. It's an entrepot city for trade with Syria and Turkey. It's contested between the Sunni Arabs, the Shiites, and the Kurds. Well, not so much the Shiites, but the Sunni Arabs and the Kurds. Shiites in the sense that al-Maliki's government wants to be powerful there. It's not a place that you could allow to be in flames and still hope for any kind of stability in Iraq. So I don't want to use that campaign phrase context sensitive that one of the candidates kept repeating, but I think there is an element of that has to be built into this withdrawal. And I'm telling you, you won't like the results if we get out too quickly or in the wrong way and Iraq goes up in flames, because it won't stay inside Iraq, it will spread to Iran and Saudi Arabia. We have to be very careful about this very key strategic area.
My only other question is one that I have to pose as a historian, and I have at least one fellow historian on the panel. And I want to pose it to all of you, and then I want to open it up for questions from the audience. But how should we now assess, do you think, the original decision to invade Iraq in March of 2003? Very controversial decision. There were many of us who suggested at the time that the war was unnecessary, that Saddam Hussein was in a box, that there had not been sufficient evidence that he constituted a direct and immediate threat to the security of the United States. I guess another way of phrasing the question is, knowing what you know now about the costs to this point, and I suppose the accomplishments, do you have an observation on how you personally see that decision in 2003? Ambassador?
I think it is, I think, accepted now that it was illegal from the point of view of international law. I think it was wrong from the point of view of just simple politics. I think it hasn't helped America in any way, and it certainly hasn't helped the people of Iraq. Getting rid of Saddam, I don't think anybody is shedding any tears about Saddam and his regime. But I think the cost has been very, very high. And at any rate, you don't want the most powerful country in the world deciding alone to go and invade countries for the wrong reasons. I don't think that is acceptable. Even if, at the end of the day, Iraq is going to become paradise on earth, that still does not justify what happened in 2003.
Well, I think the answer to the question of was it a good idea to invade Iraq has to do with what you think a war is for. What are your premises about war? Personally, I think that the Nazis, gave war a bad name, and the result of that was the United Nations Charter, which specifies two ways in which a war can be waged legitimately in international law. One is if a country is attacked. So if Iraq had attacked the United States, that would have been legitimate to attack it back. Not always the wisest way to reply to an attack, but it's legitimate. And I think one of the reasons for which people like Dick Cheney hinted around so heavily that, Saddam and bin Laden slept in the same bed every night was to create that particular premise that somehow September 11th attacks came from Iraq. Well, we now know that we've traced all the money. The Pentagon has gone through 6 million documents that we captured in Iraq. There was no operational contact between Iraq and Al-Qaeda, and I believe that this was well known to the Bush administration before the war. The other way in which a war can legitimately be waged is, for instance, there is a genocide convention passed by the United Nations that any country can come to the UN Security Council and say, this regime over here is genocidal. It's killing very large numbers of its own citizens and in the wake of the Holocaust and so forth. This is, and there was Cambodia, by so forth I don't mean to make light of other genocides, but that in the wake of these genocides, it is a responsibility of the international community to stop this sort of thing. So you could go to a country, a member nation can go to the UN Security Council and say that this regime is genocidal, needs to be removed. And in a way, that was part of the argument of the Bush administration that this is a regime that gassed its own people and it behaved genocidally. We think it killed maybe, Human Rights Watch says 300,000 civilians, and that's not counting the aggressive wars in Iran and Kuwait and so forth. So I think actually a legitimate case could have been made to the Security Council that the regime was genocidal and should be removed. However, that's not what was done. And indeed, the UN Security Council declined to authorize the war. And so I think if in the post Nazi period, when you have a United Nations, you have a United Nations Charter. This is the first time that the United States has launched a formal major war in direct contradiction to the basic principles of the United Nations Charter. It was illegal for that reason. And of course, it was a huge disaster. I wrote in my weblog before the war, people asked me, what do you think? And I said, well, remember that scene in Star Wars where they're in the trash compactor and then it starts to move? And Harrison Ford says, I have a bad feeling about this.
Actually, it's a hard question for me because, I have many theories in my mind. Legal person, and also I have to analyze the questions legally under the international law and look to that from that area, from my professional job, and find if this decision is legally or illegal. It's better to go to the Security Council and get resolution from there and go to the Iraq. But also, part of me is a human and Iraqi. And I was living in Iraq all my life. And I saw everything there. There is disaster there, sir. No one knows about Iraqis from 1980s until 2003. Ladies and gentlemen, 1988, more than 100,000 Iraqi Kurds killed north of Iraq from February 1988 until September 1988 for no reason, just because they are Kurdish. More than 2,000 villages destroyed. Iraqi government mentioned at that time, they said they are supporting Iranian forces, which is not true. That's part of my job. Iraq and Iran war stopped 1988, August 8. Anfal campaign started from February 1988 until September, which means 1 month later. That's one. Second, more than 200,000 Shias Iraqis killed for no reason. Just because they said to Saddam in that time, we don't need you. You have to leave as a president. Okay, take your family, take your money, go ahead, go outside. 200,000. And the worst of the worst is happened after that. From 1993 exactly until 2003, the average of the salary in the Iraqi employees 3,000 dinars, comparing with US dollars, which means around $1.50 per month, not per day. And that's a huge, huge economic problem. Most of the Iraqis left their education, most of the Iraqi left their homes, sell their homes. Yes, the result of the war, it is not good. Maybe some people said wars, because now we have 5 million immigrants. But just look in different view, Before, the head of the country, the father of the family, tried to kill his family. Now, the family fighting each other and also fighting foreign policies just to sit in their country. It is complicated. And I told you, frankly, all of you, it is a huge image in my mind. Because legally, I have to think legally. It's right or wrong. But as a human, now result is not good, but I'm sure next decade will be fine. But if you keep same path as leaders in Iraq, no one knows. Because they started from 1963 exactly, not 1968. no, 1963 until 2003, killing Iraqi people.
I want to give Mike a chance, but Ambassador Brahimi, you wanted to come in first?
Yeah, just to say that, I understand fully what the judge is saying. When I went to Iraq in 2004, I found that a lot of Iraqis welcomed the occupation of their country. They were so desperate because of the situation that was there. But I think that most of those Iraqis that welcomed that invasion of their country have not seen it go the right way, and they have changed their mind. That is one. The second thing is, we are talking here about, this whole war. Nobody is defending Saddam. Nobody is defending what was happening before the invasion. But what we are saying is that here is a country, a very powerful country that has taken the law in its own hands for no reason. There's no reason. When I was in Baghdad, I kept asking the Americans, can you please tell me why you invaded Iraq? Why did you invade Iraq? And today, I am saying, really, everywhere I go, shouldn't somebody be asked questions about what happened? Nobody is responsible for what was done. Let me give you a small example. I think there is a place where there was excavations, archaeological, I think it's near Kut. They built how do you call it, a landing pad for helicopters, right on that excavation ground. They have destroyed history. Shouldn't we ask a sergeant there why he did that on there? There's plenty of sand and space in Iraq. Why didn't he build it a little bit farther away? So I think there is a lot of questions to ask. And I hope that we both are wrong and that it's not 200,000 people who were killed or 1 million, but much less than that. But unfortunately, it isn't. I think the name of Kanaan Makiya is familiar to a lot of people here. It is said that when he met President Bush, that is when he was so eloquent, encouraging the Americans to go to war, that President Bush took this decision. I don't know whether it's true or not. He's the author of the Republic of Fear, and he was enthusiastically for the war. 2 years ago, he was in Erbil with every single one in the room had been supporting the war and was still supporting the Americans there. And he asked the question, how many people have we killed? And he was told 600,000. And he said, this was in the New York Times. And he said, well, we are close to what Saddam has done in 35 years. So I hope that he was wrong too. I'm afraid, I hope it's not 1 million, but I fear it's not very far from that.
I do want to give a chance for you to ask a question or two, but I also want to give Mike okay, Mike is waiving his privilege. He can come back to that when we get a chance. Here's what I would like. We're going to have, I think, Mike's coming around. Is that right? And so raise your hand if you would like to pose a question. And what I would ask is this, which is that you resist the temptation to offer a speech and go straight to a question, please. We don't have too much time. Right here.
Let's stick with the question of numbers. I agree with Michael that it is important, actually, this sense of 1 million, 100,000 in the historical picture. And we've heard this great difference of numbers about Iraqi war dead. Can you speak a little bit to where those numbers come from and why the great disagreement?
Why the great?
Michael?
If you want this one, go ahead.
Okay.
This is a hard one to explain.
Well, can I say something about this? Because I think that the numbers as they're reported in the press are difficult to interpret for most people. What was being alleged by the public health team of Roberts and his colleagues, was that if you went to Iraq in 2000, 2001, and you did a health survey and you found a baseline for how many people tended to die violently every year, you could establish that baseline. That's there are feuds and there are murders and Saddam would kill people from time to time and so forth. But there would be an average rate of violent death in Iraq. And what they alleged is they did surveys with 1,800 households and they asked them, has anybody died lately in your family violently? And the answers that they got, and they were pretty consistent across Iraq, were such that they could then take that information and project that since the invasion in 2003, an excess of some 600,000 Iraqis had died from violence. Now, this does not mean that the U.S. killed 600,000 people. Sunni guerrillas killed people, criminals killed people. Remember Saddam let 100,000 criminals out of jail? There were feuds. The breakdown of law and order. If you didn't really like your neighbor for the last 20 years, you could kill them and then nobody would say anything because there's no police around. So there were all kinds of reasons for which people were dying violently. And some of the deaths came from U.S. aerial bombardment because when the Mahdi Army uprising occurred in 2004, we bombed cities like Qut. When we took Fallujah, we bombed it and so forth. So some of the deaths are coming from U.S. Aerial bombardment, but the vast majority of them were just generalized violence inside Iraq. And of course, you can't ever get a reporting of that kind of violence. So when public health specialists have looked at violent situations, they found that what they call passive reporting, people's names showing up in newspapers and so forth, typically only gets about 10% of the actual deaths. The techniques that were used in Iraq by this team were the same techniques, and indeed was students of these professors that have been used in Darfur. So one of the things one has to keep in mind, the politics of numbers and so forth, those statistics for Darfur have never been questioned. And they'll be on the front page of the New York Times, and nobody raises any question about them. But the statistics for Iraq, which were produced in exactly the same way, and indeed the Iraq study was much more rigorous, are a matter of political football and so forth. So it's not being alleged that the U.S. killed that many people. And indeed, direct deaths from U.S. military action may be relatively small in that number. I mean, if it's 1 million dead, then maybe 100,000 directly from U.S.
Except in Fallujah.
Well, in Fallujah would be part of that death toll. But so anyway, that's, as a layperson who couldn't tell a chi-square from a crossword puzzle, that's as I understand it.
We have just a minute or two left, and so let's see, where do I see I would love to have had a student hand somewhere, but well, right here. A student, yes. Student of life, if nothing else, right? Well, go ahead.
Very quickly, this administration needed to be impeached. And as an American, I'm sorry, but it's disgrace what we've done to the Middle East. But my questions are this. One, what do we do about the depleted uranium that is poisoning that whole area? Second, I agree with the ambassador. Why didn't we protect the museum? All these archaeology sites have been destroyed. Okay, why don't we protect that museum where thousands of items have been stolen? What do we do? I'm sorry. The question I want to ask specifically to the judge as well. I had learned that Saddam Hussein was actually installed by this country. I would like you to address that. And second, there was a lawyer on 60 Minutes who was defending Saddam Hussein. He was a very famous lawyer. I think he lives in France. And he was on 60 Minutes, and he said, I'm defending Saddam Hussein for the very reason I want to bring up all the incidents the United States, this government, has providing the military to Saddam Hussein, the weapons to kill the Kurds, to kill other people. And to me, that's very important.
Okay.
The court that happened with Saddam Hussein, it was a mockery in our country because we had very little information. I want to know what we have done installing Saddam Hussein and what military we provided this man to do what he's done.
Why don't we,
thank you. I'm trying to say that very quickly.
Several
Sorry.
questions. Is there one or two responses to?
I think, very quickly, I think it's a fact that the Americans were supporting Saddam during the war against Iran and provided him directly or indirectly, they and other Western countries, France in particular, they provided him with a lot of the weapons that he used against Iran and against his people.
Also, ma'am, I think if you go to the question to the new administration or your administration in here, maybe you can get more good answer from me because I have no idea about the secret relation between Saddam and foreign policies. Frankly, that is very clear to me.
We are about out of time. What I would like to do before we wrap up and before I thank our panelists and thank all of you is to just offer any of you, if you wanted to take a few seconds to address anything that's been left on the table, or yes. Mike.
Ken, I appreciate the honor to be here, and I hate the idea of having a couple of disagreements with Ambassador Brahimi the first time I've ever met him, so let me say something that turns the table a little and commends him for his focus on peace operations around the world. This has been a huge opportunity cost of the Iraq War, that we've not been able as an international community to intervene elsewhere, and whether the effort to try to bring democracy to Iraq, which has failed for so long, I acknowledge, and only begun to show progress in the last 2 years, was worth it. We do need to get out of Iraq when we can. There's no doubt. For strategic reasons in Afghanistan and for humanitarian reasons in places like Darfur and Congo. So I want to end on that note of consensus and suggest that if it's a question of whether we get out of Iraq in 2 years or in 3 years, either way we are on a clear trajectory. Again, as Juan recently said, we took 6 brigades out in 2008. We're already on a pretty good downward path. I would just suggest that we not jeopardize the kind of progress we've seen and be gradual as we get out, because we are in fact getting out.
Actually, also I want to thank everybody who's here for this great opportunity, and also I want to say something is very clear. We have in legal fields some questions called dead questions, and dead question, that means that's never affect. Now it's Iraq chaos, and there is invading Iraq, and there is U.S. forces there, there is MNFI there, and we need to help Iraq and Iraqi people to improve, not to stuck to the past. No, we don't need to stuck what's going on there. No, we have to move forward to improve the situation and help Iraqi people, help 5 million immigrants inside and outside of Iraq to back to their home, because that's very important for their family, their home, and their future, because they are without a future now in different fields, different countries. Thanks.
Well, I was doing research this summer among Iraqi refugees in Amman, Jordan, and talking to NGOs about their condition. And I'd just like to reinforce what the judge just said. The situation is dire. And it's a situation that nobody is really accepting any responsibility for. I was told by CARE and UNICEF that there are some 50,000 Iraqis in Amman whose condition they consider to be vulnerable. There are these euphemisms in the international aid community, but I believe I would be right in saying that that means they think they're on the verge of starving to death. A fourth of the families, the Iraqi families in Jordan, had a child kidnapped, and whether they got the child back or not, they fled under those circumstances. They are running out of money, and many of them have been personally threatened. They would get a letter in Baghdad. If they show their face in that neighborhood again, they're dead, and then they would leave. And sometimes they're tracked down in Amman and they will get a second letter threatening them there. And they will quickly have to change apartments. All of them are changing their apartments every 2 or 3 months there. They're living in these very squalid places in the Palestinian areas of Amman. There's no prospect of them going back to Iraq. I went there wondering why they hadn't already, because the statistics on violence have declined. But many of them told me that they had no place to go back to, that, you know, their neighborhood had been mixed. Now it's if they were Sunnis, it's all Shiite. I had dinner with an Iraqi architect who's a prominent woman architect. She's Shia, her husband is Sunni. And she said, where would we live? If we lived in Karada, he would be killed. If we lived in Al-Mansur, I would be killed. So I think, you know, the mere decline of civilian death statistics per month shouldn't give us the impression that everything is hunky-dory there. There's been very massive demographic movements, and they have had a huge impact on displacing Iraqis. And I am not sanguine about the possibility of these people coming home anytime soon, in which case something has to be done for them.
I feel, you know, I've worked with the Americans in many, many places, and I'm very, very happy with the cooperation I have had, both from civilians and military, in Haiti, in Afghanistan, in South Africa, in Sudan, and I don't know, half a dozen other places. I even accepted to go to Iraq. And there also, I think we worked reasonably well, although there was this terrible disagreement, fundamental disagreement about the fact that they shouldn't have been there to start with. And I have a huge respect and admiration for the United States. And I think that they went wrong on this in a manner that has to be said again and again. And this is important for Iraq. It is important for the United States, and it's important for all of us. Yes, let's look to the future and see how we can help Iraq out of its problems. But I think we cannot just say, you know, let's ignore what has happened. A country has been destroyed for no reason by the most powerful country in the world. I think this is, we cannot just, you know, turn the page and say, let's forget about it. And I think, I'm sure that more and more Americans, when they know the facts, will say exactly that. This is in the interest of the Americans. It's in the interest of all of us. So it is that America I admire that I am talking to at this moment. Thank you very much.